My name is Leroy Christianson. I was a navigator in the 8th Air Force, and I was assigned to combat duty with the 303rd Bomb Group, 359th Squadron, also known as the Hells Angels. And you know enough about the 303rd, there are a number of former members here. My origins was out in North Dakota. I grew up in Mandan, North Dakota, which is 6 miles west of Bismarck across the Missouri River. Finished high school, and I came down to Minneapolis to start at the university in September of 1941. I don't recall that there was a great deal of North Dakota that encouraged me to be a flyer. There was one small airstrip on the river flats along the Missouri River on the west side, grass strip, which was used by some local flyers. One of them was Ben Ellison, who was an Arctic explorer. And I do remember seeing Wiley Post flying there several times. Having come to Minneapolis in 41, of course, I was in my first year of school, and December 7th came along. On that particular day, it so happened that there were 5 classmates, 2 from St. John's that had come down, and 3 of us from the university who were together. And the night before, we had just been at the, I think it was the old Orpheum Theater, and we had just seen Helen O'Connell with Jimmy Dorsey's band, which used to play, between the first and second movie. It was at this point that we all knew that eventually, in the next year, we'd be eligible and have to register for the draft. In the ensuing possibility of being drafted, a friend I was living with and I decided, why not try for the Air Force? So we went down and we took our cadet exams about October, I believe, and Gordy passed, and I failed on my left eye. It was a little bit too weak. But I was told, try again in another couple of months, and maybe your eye will be better. Well, in between a chance to try for another go-around at it, Gordy went off to Jefferson Barracks, Missouri, and I was left sitting in Minneapolis, and I decided, why not try for the Air Force through the draft board. So I talked to them, which is, my unit was up in North Minneapolis where I lived, and in the end of February of 43, I was drafted and went through Fort Snelling. I had asked for the Air Force, and fortunately enough, I was assigned to the Air Force. I went off with a great number of other people there to basic training at Atlantic City, New Jersey. And our barracks was the Claridge Hotel, which was a brand new hotel that had never had usage by the public, and we were on the 15th floor, which actually was the 14th floor because there was no 13th floor in the hotel, whole number. A few years ago I visited the hotel. It's now a raging casino and very elaborate. I didn't ask to go through the kitchen where I served KP a number of times. It was interesting doing basic training in Atlantic City because half of it was done after the tide went out and the sand on the beach was packed, so we did close order drill there. If the weather was too bad, we used the convention center. And back at that time, as you know, the convention center was the site of the Miss America pageants. And that was coming up in April. And of course I was there in February, March, and just before the Miss America pageant. The hotel was just a block and a half away from the steel pier, so that's where we spent most of our free time, out on the boardwalk and at the movie house in the steel pier. After going through the testing and whatever had happened at basic training, I was assigned to go to radio operator school and was off on a troop train to Camp Carter, Missouri, which is in the area of Joplin, Missouri, Neosho was a train station. I spent 12 weeks in radio operator school there. I finished the program, and during that time I was able to reapply for the cadet program and naturally passed all the written exams again, and also did pass the physical. So I was put on hold to wait for further orders, and during that time I spent several weeks just being a student instructor in the code section. Finally, orders came through. There was a troop train of cadets going off to Miami Beach. So I went from Minnesota to the East Coast, back to the middle of the country, and now I'm going back to the East Coast again. And a very nice thing happened. I was the only man left in the barracks actually for about a week, because everybody else had been shipped off to crew assignments or other assignments that they were been given. So here I was living all alone in this two-story barracks, and the day that I was supposed to leave, the company commander called me down to his office. He had a very, very nice fatherly talk, and I thought, geez, that was pretty nice. Having looked at him pretty much as a pretty stern fellow, and he wished me well on my way to whatever experiences I might take part in. So where did we end up at Miami Beach? At another hotel. And fortunately enough, on this occasion, having had basic training months before, and also having had some music background in high school band, I was assigned the job to be the squadron bugler. So every morning I'd have to get up and run through the hotel, blowing wake-up call. And then during the day, I was with the master sergeant out in the drill field, and all I had to do was blow the bugle for session of the training, and then calling back into training again. And in between times I could sit around reading books or whatever I wanted to do, or cracking coconuts and eating coconut to supplant what we had in the way of the lack of food. After the appropriate amount of time, I was 6 weeks there at Miami Beach. The assignment then was to the classification center at Santa Ana, California. So here I was going back way across the country again. So I spent a lot of time just traveling back and forth from mid-country to coast to coast. Santa Ana was a nice experience because I had an aunt and uncle living in Long Beach. And it was just before Thanksgiving time that we arrived there, and after the 2-week quarantine because of San Joaquin fever, I was able to get out on leave, and I spent Thanksgiving and Christmas with close family. It was also at this time that my brother, who was in the 5th Marine Division, prior to that he had been in New Guinea as a paratrooper, and paratroopers hadn't been able to be used, so he was sent back to Camp Pendleton for retraining, and he was able to come up from Camp Pendleton, and we spent the day Sunday together at Santa Ana. That was the last time that I had contact with my brother, because he eventually landed on Iwo Jima and lost his life there. After finishing classification at Santa Ana, we were sent off to gunnery school, as every navigator and volunteer had to do, at Kingman, Arizona, God-forsaken country. But it was an experience, as all of you know, who had gone through gunnery. So now I was now qualified as a radio operator and an aerial gunner. And at the classification, of course, I asked for navigation, and I had a time explaining why I didn't want to be a pilot. And I said, well, I just didn't think I had the feeling for flying, but I had had the experience in astronomy at school, and I read some books on navigation. I thought that was a challenging position to be in. So the classifier said, okay, we'll make you a navigator, and off I went. And navigation school was at Hondo, Texas, which was southwest of San Antonio. For those of you who are not acquainted with Texas, but it was about halfway between San Antonio and Uvalde. Now, you know, Uvalde was the hometown of Nance Garner, Vice President Nance Garner, who was also a pecan farmer. Not a pecan farmer, but a pecan farmer. Texans don't like us if you say pecans, they say pecans. So there our weekends were spent in San Antonio. We made a fair number of friends. And it's surprising how through the military paths seem to cross every once in a while. And some of these I'll probably get to as I go through the rest of my tour. I think the most scary experience in flying in navigation was night flights in the area of Texas with so many planes in the air, both from the pilot schools in the area and also the navigation schools. And one night we ran into a terrible thunderstorm, and normally on flights with 3 to 6 cadets, there was only one pilot, there was no co-pilot flying. And the pilot called me up and said, "You've got to fly co-pilot and watch out for other planes in the area." And this was in the area of Austin. And we circled around Austin for 45 minutes waiting to land because there were so many planes in the area trying to get onto the ground. Navigation school ended in July of '44, about 23rd of July, and was off to Lincoln, Nebraska for assignment, then to combat training, which took place at Sioux City, Iowa. I don't know if any of you have been through Sioux City, Iowa, but at least it was a hell of a lot closer to home than some of the other places I had been in. That's where I was assigned to my crew. I got in about 1 a.m. in the morning off the train, so it was about 9 o'clock before I met my pilot and co-pilot, who were both in the same barracks that I was in. On that particular day, the crew was on stand down because they were having a board investigation for an occurrence that happened on a flight the day before, that they were up the door on the ball turret had come loose in flight when they were at 15,000 feet, and we were going to try and find out who was responsible for not locking the door or why the door came off. Unfortunately, one of my friends from school decided that he was going to go and fly with his crew, although he didn't have to, and it was an air-to-air mission. And unfortunately, one of the fighter planes, similarly in attack, did not pull out of his dive and smashed directly into the waist of the B-17, and down it went. While on one of the training missions, one of the gunners that we had was assigned for a second tour of duty, and while in flight had to be subdued because of problems that he had, and was removed from the crew. And here's an experience of a replacement gunner, and the first time I really come in contact with another person from Minnesota, and it was Alex Hartman, who lived at Wayzata. I don't know if any of you are from the area of Wayzata, but he was from the family. If you recall, there were food produce trucks, especially chickens, that were around the cities. They supplied good markets. Hartman's poultry farm. And Alex passed away about 5 years ago. We had finished at Sioux City, Iowa, and were then sent to Lincoln, Nebraska to await assignment. We were given a B-17 at Lincoln and assigned to the European Theater of Operations, and our duty was to put the plane in flying condition, that is, swing the compass and check out the plane in flight to make sure that everything was in operation, and we were ordered off to England, flying via Bangor, Maine, and I'll never forget the morning about 6 a.m. we were flying over Niagara Falls on the way. From Bangor, we refueled there and then on to Goose Bay, Labrador. And for those of you who went through Goose Bay, this was in November. And the morning of the day we were supposed to take off, a snowstorm came up. It snowed for 3 days. The snow was up to the second story on a 2-story barracks. The streets were tunnels. Snowplows were going night and day just to keep the streets open. We were there for 7 days before they got the runways cleared. And takeoff was like, if they took the tunnel off down here on 94, it was like flying between 2 concrete walls and then taking off. We flew by over Greenland at night, and here, having heard stories of planes going down on the ice cap in the middle of our flight halfway across. Coming off from our left, we could spot some flares, and what was exhaust from the B-24, who apparently was being flown on autopilot because nobody made an attempt to veer off. They were flying directly at us. We had to dump down and turn off to the right in order to avoid them. They just kept right on going. Landed in Iceland at Reykjavik. And have you been in Iceland when the winds are blowing? That night the wind was 90 miles an hour coming out of the northwest. We had every stitch of clothes on that we possibly could, and the barracks, the Quonset huts were just rattling. And this continued on until about 10 o'clock in the morning. From there on, we were given orders and we flew down then through to, landed in Ireland as our entry into the ETO, and then off to Prestwick. From Prestwick, we were down at Chorley, and we had our Thanksgiving dinner in 1944 at Chorley, which was near Burtonwood. We were assigned from there to the 303rd Bomb Group and went down by train through Market Harborough and took our normal orientation flights around and flew our first mission on the 2nd of December, or 2nd or 3rd December. And it was not too far in. It was to Suez, Germany, and there was not a great deal of flak, so it went pretty well for us. However, the second mission was on the 6th of December, and that was to Mersburg, a place you don't really want to go because the flak was heavier than you know what there. We suffered a lot of flak damage and lost power on one engine and came back by ourselves. On the 11th of December, our third mission was to Ludwigshafen, Mannheim, and this was probably one of the most scary missions to have been completed. We were at 28,000 feet and striving to get a little higher because we were through high clouds and a lot of contrails, and visibility, not only for the target, but for the planes in formation, was horrible. And as we were coming out of the tops of clouds, coming directly at us from 3 o'clock was the plane called the Thunderbird. The namesake comes here every so often out of Galveston. And of course, they had not seen us because we were in clouds until we came out. So, what's the maneuver? In the maneuvering, the number one engine of the Thunderbird chewed off all of the wing of our right wingtip. Another 6 inches that would have gotten the aileron, and that would have been disastrous. We ended up tacking on to a group from Huntington in order to drop our bombs and then struggle along home alone again on this mission. And the fourth mission wasn't any better. we were again left alone, losing 2 engines and coming back from Koblenz. It was getting now into the time around the 19th of December and the Battle of the Bulge, and the weather in Europe, and especially in England, gave us a lot of downtime until the mission on the 24th of December, 44. On coming back, most of eastern England was completely fogged in. Some of the planes did manage to get through and land in fields surrounding, and we were ordered off to western England to find a place most convenient to land, and we found an airfield, an RAF field at Swindon, which was way over on the west coast. And we were lucky that we got in there, because within 2 hours after landing, that was fogged in. Christmas Eve dinner that night was canned beans and bangers and some hard biscuits. For those of you who weren't in England, bangers were sausages. We said were half filled with sawdust. The next day being Christmas Day, we wondered what we were going to do. But I guess I should tell you about Christmas Eve. It was one of the strange ones, considering that the year prior I had spent Christmas with relatives. Now we were at an RAF base. We were in the officers' club. It was Christmas Eve. We were drinking mild bitters, and one of the RAF officers smoking a pipe was sitting at the piano playing Christmas carols, and we were raising glasses of beer and having. And outside, it was so foggy you could hardly see your way back to the barracks where you were quartered. And the thing that impressed me that night was outside, because of the fog, nothing was moving. You didn't hear an engine from a plane, you didn't hear an engine from a motor vehicle. It was completely silent, except for what you heard coming out of the barracks around you. Now, I got to coming to these meetings because my name was on the roster of the 8th Air Force people living in the area, and the person who called me to encourage me to come was Don Gang. I didn't know who Don Gang was, and but we soon found out that we knew each other. I lived in the officers' barracks with Don's pilot, co-pilot, bombardier, and navigator. His navigator's still up here in Grand Rapids, and this we discovered a couple of years ago. Last year, while searching through the combat records of the 303rd and looking for the crews I flew with on my 12th mission on the 5th of January, flying as a deputy lead navigator, I looked, and one of the waist gunner on that mission was Don Gang. Another memorable mission would have been the February 3rd mission, when thousands of bombers hit Berlin in an 8-hour and 25-minute flight. It was a lot of heavy flak. A number of planes didn't come back. Our group fared out fairly well. The 20th of February, on a mission to Nuremberg, for the first time I was able to see the tops of the Alps down across Lake Constantine. Again, on the 15th of March, it was back to Berlin, and here the mission was the German headquarters, actually to the east of Berlin, and calculating the time for the target on making the turn from the IP. I found that it couldn't be calculated on the E6 computer. Our ground speed was so fast. The winds aloft were out of the northwest at about 150 knots, which meant that the whole formation had to turn off because we were closing on the target too fast. We had to turn off and readjust and come back from a different angle to slow down the ground speed approach to the target. And it was coincidental that at this past Collins exhibition out at the airport, the night of the round table, I met another navigator who I didn't know was a navigator because I worked with him for about 27 years at the University School of Dentistry. I knew him as being in the Army Medical Corps, and he comes up to me and he says, "I didn't know you were a navigator." And the last I know, he retired as either a colonel in the medical corps, but he transferred because of his training into the medical corps out there, and he was on the same mission. He says, "I calculated the same wind speed, and surprised everybody by telling them that we couldn't possibly be on a course for the target at such speed." So another crossing of people in military service that little was known about unless you got into contact and talking with them. I finished my 30th mission on the 3rd of April and flew 2 extra missions. Mainly, my pilot had a couple missions left, and he said, "We're the only 2 left from the crew. The others have gone home. Why don't you wait around? We'll go back together and have a good time on the boat." Well, the last 2 missions, one was to Hitzacker and the other was to Truenbritzen, and I think they turned out to be the 2 best bombing missions I was on because they were both shack hits on railroad targets of those 2 cities. An interesting occurrence happened just a short time before that, during the latter part of March. While I was at Camp Crowder, Missouri, in a radio operator school, across the street was an officer's candidate school. And the men in the officer's candidate school were then assigned as squadron commanders for these new GIs who were in radio operation or were in any form of the communications courses that we're on. Well, one evening there was an entertainment group that was coming through, and they were putting on a little skit for an officers' party at the officers' club. And I was watching it. Who comes on stage but one of the characters who was the squadron commander from OCS school for the squadron I was in at Camp Crowder, Missouri. Second lieutenant, I can't remember his name. But after the program, we were standing talking at the bar, and I went up to him and I said, "You probably don't remember who I am, but I remember you were a squadron commander at Camp Crowder." "Oh yes, he knew all about Camp Crowder." I was standing there talking to him, and I had my first lieutenant bars on, and he was looking at me, so I had to explain to him how I got through Camp Crowder, Missouri, and then back over here to England, and standing talking to him at the officers' bar. He was, I think, certainly perplexed how things happened. Some of you must have gone to retirement or a flak leave at one of the rest homes that the Red Cross had. I was off to Fursdown, which is out by Salisbury Cathedral in Winchester. A very nice place. It was a country, the home of one of the air commanders in the RAF who was based in London. Now, how often would you think that you would run into a place like this and you would run into a person that you would know or who knew somebody of your family from back home? One of the Red Cross women there was a person from Bismarck, North Dakota, and was a very good friend of my aunt who lived there. She had worked on the Bismarck Tribune before joining the Red Cross to go overseas. So out of this meeting, a nice article appeared about a month or so later in the Bismarck Tribune of our particular meeting. As I said, my last mission was in April, and of course that was because VE Day was coming up. And on VE Day, it was necessary to have a parade, and I recounted this information last fall. When you have a parade, you have to have a band, and the band was organized by the group commander, who at that time was Colonel Sykes, and we needed a sousaphone player, and he used to play sousaphone, so he was a sousaphone player in the band. And the rest of his staff had to be the reviewing officers. But also in this band, Bill Reynolds and I got to talking about this parade down at the reunion in Branson, Missouri, and Bill Reynolds, a volunteer from the 360th, played baritone in that band, and I played French horn. So we were marching pretty close together, and at that time didn't know each other. And all of a sudden, last year, we met here. As I said, we were there until the base closed down, which was in May, and then we were sent off to the 94th Bomb Group at Bury St. Edmunds. And my pilot and I were put back together with a co-pilot, an engineer, and a radio operator, and assigned to the Air Transport Command and sent to Burton Wood to pick up a plane and fly back from Prestwick to the United States. The plane had been grounded in Switzerland for most of the war and looked like it was in pretty good shape. Although, on our takeoff from Prestwick to Iceland, we got 20 minutes out over the North Sea, and the life raft compartment door on the left side by the radio compartment opened up, and the life raft banged out and partially inflated and hung on the tail. We made it back into base and spent about 3-4 days waiting for them to replace the plane. They fixed up the tail, and off we went again, and went off to Iceland, where we got chewed out royally because we hadn't reported that we had returned to base. And it was our thought that once we returned to base, that communication should have been from Prestwick back to Iceland. From Iceland, we went on to Bluey West 1. And if any of you have been in there, that's another experience of flying in through a tunnel. You pull in from the coast, and then you fly by ground, by pilotage, around through the fjord, and all of a sudden, you make the turn, and up ahead is one runway. At the end of the runway is the shearing face of a cliff and glacier. But at the approach end of the runway is the peak of an island standing up about 50 feet out of the water. So you come down in and then drop down. And taking off, of course, you take off kind of downhill, so you gain speed, and when you get down at the end of the runway, you pull up and you hopefully miss the peak of that island. Things were going fine until we hit an ice storm halfway to Grenier Field, New Hampshire, when all 4 engines, the top started going out of sync, and there was no de-icer fluid. And we were down to within, I would say, 50 to 40 feet off the water, and the warmth of the water was enough to soften up and melt the ice, and it was thrown off, and it was like flak hitting the plane as that ice came off the tops. And we were able to fly that way across the water for a while all the ice came off and gained altitude and made it back to New Hampshire. And we landed there in September of 1945. On board, we had with us 12 people from the Quartermaster Corps who had spent most of the war in Soviet Russia up by Murmansk, tallying the incoming supplies from the U.S. to the Soviets. The man in charge was a Major Boggs, who that night at the Officers Club after we had landed and had our meal, wouldn't allow us to buy one single drink. He was so damn glad to get back safely. And that was the end of my service in the Air Force at that time. That's why I like B-17s.
Everything was good up to one. Okay, Leroy, we thank you very much, gentlemen. Great turnout today. Hope to see you all, and we'll